James-Assiniboia-Headingley.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honour to rise and speak in support of C-45, the Cannabis Act, and the amendments that I and my fellow colleagues on the Health Committee introduced. Back in August, I held a town hall in my riding regarding the legalization and regulation of cannabis. Not only am I in support of this legislation, but so are many of my constituents. Teachers, parents, seniors. Groups of the loyal opposition regularly list as being concerned about the legalization of cannabis have all approached me, either at my town hall or contacted my office about their concerns. They have concerns that a youth who makes a mistake by possessing a small amount of cannabis may be thrown into prison. Concerns that this youth will have to carry a criminal record for the remainder of their life, and it will hinder their ability to find employment and lead a regular life. Concerns that fellow citizens are unknowingly ingesting products that could be laced with dangerous substances. Concerns that the prohibition on cannabis isn't helping to fight drugs, but instead allows criminal elements to terrorize communities and profit, just like they did during the American prohibition on alcohol. Mr. Speaker, these are the concerns of my constituents. As a member of the Health Committee, I spent several weeks intensely reviewing this legislation. This included a week of back-to-back meetings where we heard testimony from over 100 witnesses. Most of these witnesses were in favor of legalizing and regulating cannabis. This legislation strikes a balance between addressing the need to end prohibition while addressing the challenges other jurisdictions faced when regulating cannabis. Bill C-45 allows an adult to possess up to 30 grams in public, a measure that ensures no one will be criminalized for possessing a reasonable amount of cannabis, while ensuring those who continue to illicitly sell cannabis on the street would be charged. The legislation allows for home cultivation with up to 4 plants per residence, an amount that is within reason for an individual while making it unfeasible for criminal elements to profit. This bill also protects the consumers by implementing industry-wide rules and standards on basic things, such as sanitary production requirements, restrictions on use of unauthorized pesticides, product testing, and restrictions on use of ingredients and additives. We are creating a framework where Canadians can trust that the products they purchase will be safe and free of dangerous chemicals or substances without having to take a criminal's word on face value. As a physician who has spent over 20 years in the emergency room, I have treated patients who unknowingly ingested what they thought was just cannabis. I can inform the House that this is indeed a concern worth resolving, and I applaud the government's commitment to the health and safety of Canadians. Mr. Speaker, this legislation also protects youth by creating a framework for a minimum age of purchase of 18 years through a licensed retailer, requiring child-proof packaging and warning labels, and providing for public education and awareness campaigns of the dangers associated with cannabis. I will also add that yesterday the government announced a new investment of $36.4 million over the next 5 years for an education and awareness campaign. This investment is in addition to the funding announced in Budget 2017, bringing the total investment in education and awareness to $46 million. The Act also prohibits products or packaging that are appealing to youth, selling cannabis through a self-service display or vending machine, promoting cannabis except in the narrowest of circumstances where the promotion could not be seen by a young person. This Act also creates two new criminal convictions to protect youth by making it illegal to give or sell cannabis to a youth and using a youth to commit a cannabis-related offence. This bill also has a provision to protect youth that make a mistake when in possession of 5 grams of cannabis or less, to ensure they don't carry a criminal record for the rest of their lives. I want to take a moment to address the notion raised by the opposition that we are normalizing cannabis use among youth. The truth, cannabis use in Canada has already been normalized. With the second highest rate of youth usage in the world, it is obvious that the current system does not work. We need to stop focusing on a prohibitionist model on cannabis, hoping to get a different result in the future. We need to use an evidence-based approach that restricts access to youth while removing the financial incentives that embolden criminal elements. I would like to touch on another item that the opposition regularly states, is that vehicle collisions and fatalities in jurisdictions that have legalized recreational cannabis has increased. This statement is incorrect. While statistics before and after legalization indicate an increase in impaired driving, public safety officials in the states of Washington and Colorado are in agreement that this apparent increase was the result of improved detection methods. In a letter from the Governor and Attorney General of the state of Washington addressed to Attorney General Jeff Sessions, they wrote, "Several of the statistics quoted in your letter on the increasing incidence of marijuana DUIs are distorted by the fact that the testing regime has been changed with state legalization. Any amount of drug driving and collisions is too high. Prior to marijuana legalization, blood testing for THC at suspected DUI traffic stops was substantially less common. Consequently, comparable statistics do not exist." Additionally, in a letter from the Governor and Attorney General of Colorado, again to Attorney General Jeff Sessions, they stated that they enacted new laws giving state and local law enforcement additional tools to prosecute individuals driving under the influence of marijuana and have significantly increased the number of law enforcement officers who are trained to detect drug-impaired driving, allowing the state to identify and detain more individuals who are driving impaired than previously. More importantly, they wrote that the number of impaired drivers went down. The letter states, in the first 6 months of 2017, the number of drivers the Colorado State Patrol considered impaired by marijuana dropped by 21% compared to the first 6 months of 2016. If the House wishes, I can table these two letters from Washington and Colorado for review. It is evident that any amount of impaired driving or collisions is too high, and that is why I was pleased that the government is progressing with C-46 in an effort to address and curtail impaired driving, and has committed up to $161 million for the training of frontline officers in how to recognize the signs and symptoms of drug-impaired driving, providing access to drug screening devices, and raising public awareness about the dangers of drug-impaired driving. Mr. Speaker, in May of this year, I had the honour of rising and speaking in favour of this legislation at second reading. Since then, the legislation has been amended by my fellow colleagues and I on the Health Committee. Many were technical elements to strengthen the bill, but there were several amendments of consequence as a result of our witness testimony during our intensive review. One of the more consequential amendments that were made was the removal of height restrictions on cannabis plants for home cultivation, so that no one who lets a plant accidentally overgrow is deemed a criminal. Additionally, the legislation was amended to ensure that it is in line with the Good Samaritan Drug Overdose Act, which was introduced by my fellow Health Committee colleague, the member from Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, and of which I was proud to second, to ensure that an individual who commits a cannabis-related offence will not be charged if he or she calls the police or medical services to report an overdose. Mr. Speaker, I should add that I was disheartened when the Conservative members in the committee unanimously voted against this amendment that will save lives. Additionally, our committee amended the legislation to ensure that edibles and concentrates will be entered under Schedule 4 of the legislation as a class of cannabis that an authorized person may sell by either an order in council or a clause that will allow it to come into force on the first anniversary of the day on which Section 33 comes to force. Essentially, this ensures that edibles and concentrates will be legalized and properly regulated within a one-year time frame of when this legislation is enacted. Given the transformative nature of this legislation, our committee introduced an amendment to require the minister to conduct a review of the Act after 3 years and to table a report before Parliament. This will enable us, as parliamentarians, to determine if changes to the legislation are necessary to ensure the protection of public health and safety. Our government have also amended Subclause 139 to provide the Governor and Council authority to restrict the characteristics of certain items, to set limits on the amount or concentration of chemical compounds, and to ensure regulated products under legislation will be consistent with the provisions in S5. Mr. Speaker, the opposition has been constantly counting down to remind us how many days until legalization we have, and have today reminded us that it is 243 days. And while I am glad that my colleagues across the aisle can count backwards on a calendar, I think we should look at it in a different way. In 243 days, we can end a system that victimizes ordinary Canadians and emboldens criminal elements in our society. In 243 days, we can end a system that ruins the lives through lost opportunity and social stigma. Mr. Speaker, in 243 days, we can end a system that should never have been put in place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You're here. You're here.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Yellowhead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Through you, Mr. Speaker, I believe it's a member from Bay of Quinte, is it? I hope I'm correct. Anyways, I was just the member from Scarborough Southwest said he didn't want to mislead people, but then he did mislead people. And I want to ask through you to the honourable member across. You know, we had an apartment building, and we're talking about an apartment building, maybe 100 units. And that could be 400 plants, because under the criminal code and under law in Canada states that your dwelling is your dwelling. And he said, well, no, the municipality or the province could change that rule. And that's not correct. And I wonder if the member would like to quote on that, please, through you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Charleswood-St. James-Assiniboia-Headingley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. In fact, that municipalities do have the right to make rules and municipalities have the right to make rules regarding real estate, and if they wish, could make such laws. I should add that many of these dangers on large units are suppositions. When I asked a member of the Ontario Provincial Police in Health Committee who surmised exactly this number for a 400-unit block that might have 200 units growing cannabis, I asked what information did the member or did this member have to make this supposition? And the answer was, and I quote, "I have no facts to back that statement up." Thank you.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Sherbrooke.
The honourable member for Sherbrooke. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech and his knowledge in this field, because he obviously has a background that's relevant. My colleague showed earlier that for possession of over 30 grams, that will be a crime under the criminal code, liable to jail time for possession over the limit set by the government. And that would be the same as saying for alcohol, if you had over 100 liters of alcohol, that would be a crime. But obviously that's not what we're talking about here, because we don't want to go back to the years of prohibition. But my question is whether the government intends in the future to correct this shortcoming and truly legalize, because my question for my colleague is this truly legalization when there's still a limit and an offence under the criminal code for possession over a certain amount? The honourable member for Charleswood-St. James.
Speaker, as I said in my speech, there is certainly this is subject to review in 3 years. We have been advised by many jurisdictions that it is best to provide in a stepwise pattern. One of the things we are addressing is that we are making legal a substance that is illegal, and one of the problems is that there's a substantial black market. We need to put firm criminal penalties on those who might be dealing, and the 30 grams is a limit that is what someone might reasonably carry without dealing. Now, one might say that this is arbitrary, but every criminal offense such as this has a limit. If I'm driving a vehicle and my blood alcohol level is 0.079, I am within the law. If I am driving and I am 0.08, I am now criminal. So this is very similar, that we must set these rules. But again, this is subject to review, and if we find that in the interest of public safety that this needs to be changed, it can be.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today